Hi there. I'm at BKC-IH Moscow, which is the biggest school in Moscow, the biggest English school, a language school. And I have a couple of wonderful guests today. And the first guest is Edward Evans.
Hello.
Edward has been working for BKC-IH for more than 13 years. He did his CELTA here and started as a teacher and then rose in, can I say pecking order in this way?
Yes, I think so, yes.
And now, so you are an academic manager and a CELTA trainer.
That's right.
And recently Edward became the director of studies for the whole school, where he divides his time between teaching, teacher training and management. And so we meet here actually because of the conference that is starting tomorrow. And you're giving a talk there, and the talk is about TBL, task-based learning. And so I wanted to talk about this topic a bit. And my question's like a bit long-winded, but still I'm gonna say that in Russia, I have this feeling that in Russia TBL is, like teachers are a bit suspicious about that. And you also mentioned this fluency-first approach in your talk. We, or particularly those people who have experience of learning at schools, like state schools or particularly at universities, somehow we have this tradition of going from accuracy to fluency. Yeah? So why do you think that TBL and fluency first can be more effective, if I can put it?
Well, first and foremost, I think that learning a language should be about communication. Of course, things like accuracy play into this idea. So if you're totally inaccurate, then you're not going to be communicating very much. But the kind of more traditional approach that you might see not only in Russian schools, but also in any English language classroom, where you decide to present something, teach something, practice it until you can get it right, and only then try to communicate using it. Perhaps that's not the right way round of doing it. There should be much more of an emphasis on actually being able to communicate a message. So what I like about the task-based approach is that you really do start with trying to communicate a message using whatever resources you have. And one of the principles is that if you lack those resources, so if you can't say something, then of course you can find out how to say it. I mean, it could be as simple as looking it up, but it's more naturally perhaps asking the teacher how to say something to actually communicate it at the very time you need it, and thus putting the meaning first.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking of this constant problem or like moments in the lessons where students raise their hands. Okay, but how do I say blah blah blah? Yeah, and like they try to communicate a message, and then they say, but как сказать по-английски, whatever. Yeah. So how do you think these situations should be addressed?
Well, this is an ideal time to be able to learn something in the lesson. Another great thing about the task-based, and I'll just come back to your question in a moment. In a regular lesson where you present something, you know exactly what you're going to teach, you know exactly what you want the students to learn. Whether they do learn it or not is another question, but you know exactly what the target language is. And in task-based learning, yes, you might have some idea. Let's not pretend that you have no idea, but you might have some idea what they're going to learn, but it might turn out that what they really need is something actually different. So you give them a task, and it turns out that they need, it could be a particular vocabulary item, it could be a particular set of items, it could be some particular functional language, or it even could be a grammar structure that they need to be able to express something. And if they're going to put their hand up and say, well, how do I say this? That could be the ideal time for them to actually learn it, because that's exactly when they need it. So I understand that in bigger classes this might start to become impractical, but in the kind of context that we work in with maximum 12, 13, 14 students,
Yeah,
it's
10,
not an
8,
issue.
10, it's like
Right.
a normal group for a language class. Yeah.
Then it does become practical. It actually lets the students work, and it sounds a bit pretentious, I suppose, on their sort of internal syllabus. So a course would have a syllabus. A course book often has its own syllabus, but that's not always exactly what the students need to learn, and this actually helps you to at least partially address that and to teach them what they need to learn, what they don't have, what they're not sure about, what they want to say.
So we may say that you start with a task, and then you provide them with some useful chunks of language, vocabulary, grammar structures.
So there are quite a few different flavours of task-based learning. Some of them you actually do give them some of these chunks and things before you start. The one which I'm going to be talking about more is one where the main focus on language does come after the task. So before the task you might get an example, you might get a model, but the actual proper focus on language, there would be some during the task, as we mentioned. So as people realise they need something, they can ask, they can check for themselves as well. But there will be a major focus on the language after the task is finished. So teaching a particular, it could be a grammar point, it could be a set of vocabulary, it could be a set of functional language, something like that, or combinations of those, plus working on any emergent language that happened, that occurred during the task, things which people produced that you didn't expect them to perhaps, which was good, or things which people needed from you, that's all emergent language, and you can address both of those. Something which seems to be in most descriptions rather optional, but to my mind this is rather important, is after you've done that, I think we should be doing the task again, to be honest, or something very similar.
Repeat the task,
to actually get a chance to really use and acquire this language, because of course the language focus is going to be about learning the language consciously, whereas we want to try and move that into acquisition. And I think to do that we really want to repeat the task again.
Yeah, well, I also all for task repetition, particularly in speaking. I love doing it, and I advise my students to do it. But for those who are, again, not so familiar with TBL, when we speak about the task, what kind of things can be a task in this task-based learning context?
Well, it does depend on who you ask, shall we say. There are different people have different takes on it, as I understand it. This man who set up the first TBL was called Prabhu, and he was working in Bangalore, I think that's right, in India.
Yeah.
He basically said it was anything, just anything, and it could be a kind of real lifestyle task, like role playing a shop interaction, a shopkeeper and a customer,
like buying for something in a shop.
It could be a classroom task of the kind that we're totally familiar with. It could be read a text and summarize it or something like that. That could be the more kind of mainstream tasks, and as I understand it, this is mostly through the influence of David and Jane Willis. Is things like you've got some kind of information gap or an opinion gap, that's to say, or you might need to solve a problem. And in fact, most of the tasks I've seen in books have been problem solving, shall we say. You've got $10 million to spend on a project. Which project do you want to do? So problem solving, ranking is a common one. Which is the most important, which is the least important, those kinds of things.
And they have to discuss it and come to a conclusion, That's
right. So the task is not a linguistic task. The task is a task with a meaningful, at least
communicative.
A meaningful outcome. And of course, the idea is that you will require certain language to complete the task. It could be the language that was predicted by the teacher. It could be something else. But whatever it is, you'll be learning it while doing the task and after doing the task.
And the task, continue talking about the task of the teacher, So it seems that it's quite manifold and quite complex. So the teacher assigned the task, the small groups, it's usually done in small groups, right? And so the teacher monitors and they have to think about a lot of things. So emerging language, target language.
Well, okay, in a very pure version of the task of task-based language, there is no target language, right? I think that's a little bit of a fiction, shall we say, for absolute purists, a bit like dogma, when they say, "Oh, I don't know what I'm going to teach before I go in. I'm not sure how true that is," right? But I think that's a bit of a fiction.
Yeah, we still have something up to.
Yes,
up
I mean,
sleeves,
you can look at the task and say, "Well, I think you'll need these verb forms. I think you'll need this lexis," but there will always be something surprising. So yes, the teacher's job is to be monitoring, noting down the gaps in the student's language that we need to work on. The idea being that, unlike a regular class where you decide on the syllabus beforehand, you decide on what you're going to teach beforehand, to a great extent, again, that's a simplified version of the truth, of course, but to a great extent it's all decided beforehand. Here, the decisions are made in the class, which does mean if you're not comfortable with that, then it can be a bit stressful for the teacher, because there are unknowns in the class as you walk in.
Uncertainties,
absolutely,
you have to
yes.
deal
But
with.
I mean, it's something one can cope with, and an experienced language teacher who's worked in the regular way will have a lot of this language and the techniques to teach it at their fingertips, and they because they've done it before. So in a PPP style class where you're presenting first, if you've presented, I don't know what it would be, past perfect before, but then in a task-based class it turns out they need the past perfect. Well, you've got it there. I suppose for less experienced teachers who might be more nervous about that, it is possible to split the task between lessons. So you can do the task this lesson, and you can do the language focus the next lesson. So you're splitting split the task cycle over the lessons. In that way, which will give you more preparation time.
All right, but back to this fluency first, accuracy first. Again, some critics of this fluency first thing can say, like, but how can they speak if they don't know grammar? It's going to be all gibberish. It's going to be something incomprehensible, and it's going to be an offence to the English language. So what could you say to that?
Well, I haven't got experience of working with TBL at a very low level. I can imagine that it's possible, but it would be really a big challenge when you have no fluency to start with. To actually,
so it should be like upper A2, B1?
To my mind, it will be much more straightforward to do it then. I won't go as far as to say impossible to do it at lower levels, but I think it will be very difficult.
Right.
If it's fluency first and you have no fluency, it's going to be very challenging.
Makes sense.
But producing imperfect English is the way to improve it. If you never take any risk with your English or any language that you're learning, or anything you ought to learn at all, if you never take any risk, if you only ever want to get it correct, then you are going to very much limit yourself. You're also very much limited to what the teacher has decided you're going to learn, as opposed to what you may need to learn. And I think that's a very important reason why TBL can be very useful.
Right, and again, the question that arises here is about fossilized errors. So imagine that we are concentrated on fluency, and there are these fossilized errors just to explain what a fossilized error is, when the students repeatedly make mistakes that were they had to acquire the previous levels, when they don't add third person s, or confuse past perfect with past simple with present perfect, and such things. How do you tackle fossilized errors in TBL or in general?
Well, firstly, I perhaps would say errors, one of the reasons errors become fossilized is because what has been said is comprehensible, just not perfect, and so there's no reason to fix it. Okay, of course there is a reason, you want to get it correct, but there's no communicative reason to fix it. So on the one hand, perhaps these fossilized errors weren't so serious in the first place, but TBL does present opportunities for fixing this kind of thing. So there's a stage which I remember when I first started teaching, we were using a book that had some tasks in it, and I, as well as a lot of other teachers, were very frustrated because we would do the task, we teach the language, we thought, we'd do the task, and they wouldn't use any of it. So that was very frustrating, but it was only a little while later, I think I learnt it when I did the CAM course actually, but I realised what I was missing, or what we were all missing if we were complaining, which was that there's an important stage in the process. You do the task, and then you report on the task. So when you're doing the task, you're focused very much on the outcome of the task. That's a meaningful outcome. That's to say, I don't know, my $10 million, who's it going to?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm going to just use whatever linguistic resources I've got, including all the fossilized errors, including all the mistakes and the imperfect English, just to get the meaning across. That in itself is an achievement, because we're hoping to be fluent and being able to communicate. So that in itself is an achievement. But well, there's a report stage. So the idea is that once you've solved it, let's say in pairs or in small groups, you're supposed to present what you decided, what you achieved, to somebody else, including the teacher, although the teacher isn't the only person who it's being presented to. And the idea is that this information that's presented is not only, you don't need to worry about the content anymore, you've worked out the answer, but now you should be focusing more on the language. And so there's the report stage, and then but before the report stage, there's the preparation stage, and this definitely gets forgotten by many. It's several minutes probably to really think about any language that you collected during the lesson, so either before the task in a pre-task or during the task from the teacher. Maybe to ask the teacher, how do I say this the best way? I'm not sure about how to say this. Maybe recalling something from previous lessons, that would be a good time to do it. So you actually gather all your thoughts together, not without talking, it will be thinking time, making notes and so on. That's the time when you really produce the best language you possibly can, and that's the time when hopefully these fossilized errors can be found and thought about and corrected.
Right, makes sense. Right, so what sort of advice can you give to those teachers who want to try out TBL, who's never done TBL before, but what could be the first steps?
So some of my favourite TBL activities which I've seen are in the course book called Cutting Edge. It's, let me get this right, it's a Pearson book, yeah. So it's, I think they have a third edition, but even that's not very new anymore. So I genuinely don't know how current
fourth, yeah, but I saw a fresh edition with a new cover, but probably it was just a year or two ago.
So we actually used to use it as our main course book for intermediate and above, and I used to really like it. But it's a good way into this, because the whole book is not based on tasks, only one task per unit. And they have these very engaging, interesting tasks. Something I always say about Cutting Edge is it is a little bit banal. The book feels a bit banal, by which I mean that the texts aren't very exciting and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, because the texts are banal, they are very universal. So actually everybody has something to say about them. So the first appearance is that it's maybe not as interesting as some of the others, but actually in my opinion it ends up being a lot more interesting. Anyway, the tasks, this one about dealing out the $10 million, which I keep on coming back to, that was one of the very first lessons I ever taught after CELTA. I remember this, of how to deal out this money to this island. They're all in there. One caveat I would say is that the what I mentioned about reporting and preparation time is not explicitly dealt with in the book, so that's something you might want to have a look in some other books about. One book I really enjoy. I mean, this is a very new book. This is one I've based my talk on. This is Activities for Task-Based Learning by Anderson and McCutcheon. It's a very new book. It has some theory at the beginning, which will tell you all about how to do it, and then it has a load of ready-made tasks, somewhat similar to those ones in Cutting Edge, although there are some at the end which I think you wouldn't find about working with texts. You wouldn't find those in Cutting Edge, I don't think. So that's a really good first book. And then there's I suppose they're the sort of classic texts. There's one by I think it's Jane Willis.
The green one, they both wrote
yes,
there's
right? Doing the task-based...
Doing the task-based learning
approach, I think it's called. That's both of them, yes, David and
by
Jane
Oxford
Willis,
University Press, and it's green.
And there's an older one called A Framework for Task-Based Learning. That's just Jane Willis, I think. I fear Dave Willis is no longer with us, as far as I know. But those are two good books as well. But if you want practical tasks, then this book I just showed you, and cutting edge would be a very good way in.
Yeah,
and especially as they're integrated into a course with much more, shall we say, familiar activities, and actually even the non-task-based books, those books I really like as well. So, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And the last question, what teacher training courses do you teach at BKC-IH, and who do you think they might be most useful to?
Okay, so I'm a CELTA trainer. That's the only course I'm doing at the moment, and I tend to do one or two a year. It's, as I'm sure many of our viewers will know, it's a foundation course in teaching English as a foreign language for adults in particular. Most of the candidates I work with are already teachers, and they tend to be very strong candidates. Some of them have done TKT previously, many of them haven't, but they've done pedagogical degrees. They really know how to do their job, but they are keen to find out perhaps some of these techniques more related to, shall we say, the communicative approach, a way that may be different from what they've been doing before, maybe different from what they were taught at university. Can add some interest to what they're doing, to add more communicative activities to what they're doing. It just puts a new spin on what they've learnt already, and people I've worked with seem to believe that it really has helped them with their career. Something they can bring back to their classes, whichever classes they're doing, perhaps in higher education institutions or wherever. Of course, the task isn't only open to those people. It is open to anybody who wants to become an English teacher who hasn't previously taught, or maybe has taught but without any qualifications. We tend to have a mixture of candidates, like I've described, local candidates from Russia who are, as I said, usually very, very serious about their job, very knowledgeable, and are able to achieve a great deal by the end of the course. And we also have people from abroad, sometimes native speakers, sometimes not, it doesn't matter, but people who are from outside of the teaching profession. I should say, actually, there are some local candidates, of course, who fit that profile as well. And they will get something different from the course, I would say. For them, it really is going to be a boot camp, shall we say, a really just a start on their way to something, to perhaps a change of career or an additional career that they want. But we do cater to both those profiles of people, and I think both of them get a lot from the course.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been really engaging. Thank you.
Thank you.